Welcome to Bookchat. My book is Marianne Musgrove's Frieda. For me, it's especially exciting to be reading a book set in my home state and written by someone who lives in Adelaide and who cares about preserving our history and some of the challenges we've had since settlement. It's 1913 and Frieda Wilhelmina Brandt is sailing from Germany to Australia to begin a new life in Australia. In Adelaide, in fact. Quite a shocking conversation took place on the boat that may have caused Frieda to question her father's decision to migrate to Australia. I'd like to read you this passage to put you in the picture. A ship with a yellow flag was anchored near the port and a dinghy was transporting a man to a small island close by. We'll take up the story here. When it docked, two sailors heaved a man lying on a stretcher out of the boat. This man had yellow-brown skin and looked terribly thin. A woman with black hair and the same coloured skin climbed out after them, followed by a weeping girl. "What's wrong with him?" asked Frieda, her brow creased with concern. "Could be smallpox, maybe typhus," replied Mr. Parry, a friend Pappy had made on the journey. "These folk are passengers from the ship downriver, the one that's flying a yellow flag. Yellow means someone on board has a serious contagious disease and everyone should keep their distance." Frieda gazed at the girl clinging to her mother. She's about my age, she thought, and her heart flew across the water to her. Where are they taking him? To the quarantine station, I imagine, said Pappy. Mr. Parry nodded. See those wooden buildings? Frieda followed his gaze. Beyond the tree line were a few basic huts surrounded by dry brown bushes and trees bowing in the hot wind. Nothing like the vibrant oranges and reds of Heidelberg's autumn. It looks so... Frieda tried to think of the correct word in English. Miserable, she said at last. How long must they stay there? Until he gets well, Mr. Parry replied, or until he... When his voice trailed off, Frieda noticed his grim expression and swallowed. Dies? She finished. Yes, he said, and crossed himself, as Frieda had seen the Catholics do. No one chooses to go to Torrens Island if they can help it. Like ghostly fingers skimming across piano keys, a chill ran up and down Frieda's spine. How, she wondered, would she feel if it were Pappy on that stretcher? Those poor people, she whispered, slipping her hand into her pocket and rubbing Omar's little brass pig for luck. A large man elbowed his way through the crowd and leaned his bulk against the railing. Don't waste your sympathy on the likes of them, he barked. Frieda turned to see Dr. Barbary. He was, without doubt, her least favourite passenger. Ever since he'd boarded the ship in Southampton, he'd spoken of nothing except how good the English were at everything. Sport, medicine, science, fighting wars, and he wasn't even English. He was Australian. What I'd like to know, he continued, is how on earth that Chinaman slipped through the net. We've got laws to stop that kind coming into our country. Mr. Parry interrupted him, his cheeks flushing pink. Now hold on a second, Barbary. From my work in the government, I can tell you the Chinese are allowed into Australia so long as they pass the dictation test. That man is clearly well educated or he wouldn't have passed. Dr. Barbary sniffed. I'll be speaking to the White Australia Club about this. See what we can do about closing that loophole. He proudly patted his lapel, then paused and looked down. Oh dear, my club badge is missing. I wonder where it's got to. As the doctor searched his pockets, Frieda spotted the badge lying on the deck near her foot. She bent down discreetly and picked it up. It was made of a brass circle with a silver map of Australia in the middle. Written on the map in raised letters were the words, White Australia. The first time Frieda had seen him wearing this badge, she had thought perhaps the club members had to wear white jackets. Now she wasn't so sure. She was about to tap Dr. Barbary on the shoulder and hand the badge back to him when Pappy said, "Why shouldn't non-whites migrate to Australia? Surely there is enough room." "Of course there's enough room," said Mr. Parry, his eyes flashing. "Are you mad?" cried the doctor. "The last thing we want is that lot." He jabbed his finger in the direction of the Chinaman. "Taking the jobs of honest white citizens, or worse, spreading death and disease. Send that chappie and his family back home, I say. Or better still, let 'em rot." Honest white citizens? Let them rot? So that was what White Australia meant, thought Frieda. Dr. Barbary wanted to keep white people in and coloured people out. And it wasn't just him. There was a whole club dedicated to the cause. As their ship sailed down the river, the Chinese family passed out of view, and Dr. Barbary moved on to a new topic. But Frieda couldn't shake the memory of the girl watching helplessly as her father suffered. Staring at Dr. Barbary, then down at the muddy river below, she felt red-hot anger bubbling up from deep within her. She leaned over the railing, stretched out her arm, and dropped the badge into the churning water. So, we can see that Musgrove is not afraid to explore one of the most contentious issues in our history, the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901, or better known as the White Australia Policy. But that is not the only historical hot potato that pops up in Frieda. If you'd like to read a book set in your very own city that sees the world through the eyes of a young girl coping with both culture shock and growing up, this is the book for you. Frieda is a feisty young lady, and she's not afraid to fight for what she believes is right and just. If you're in Year 7 or 8, I would look out for it in the library or ask your librarian to order one in. Well, that's all on Bookchat today. Hope to see you next time. Remember that a book is a gift that keeps on giving every time you read it and discover just a little more about life and about yourself.